Okay, this is 2 Kings chapter 19. Some fun stuff we got to learn in this chapter. It's going to get really crazy here. This is the buildup of the drama, basically, in this story. So some fun stuff we got to go over. Now, it's important for us to look at this, okay, and understand again, this is Judah, okay? Most of the land of Judah has been taken by Assyria. Israel has been gone for about 8 or 9 years now. The kingdom of Israel doesn't exist anymore. Kingdom of Assyria, all the Philistine nations, all those things, they're all assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. Egypt's kind of by themselves, but they're not a threat according to Assyria. Then Judah has kind of shrunk down to about Jerusalem, and maybe some of the small suburbs around Jerusalem is about it. And now they're coming in going, look, why are you fighting? Why are you putting this up? Just come along with us. Just do this. Why is your God better than our God, kind of thing, like from the last chapter. We have now the beginning of sometimes in a movie, you'll watch a movie and there'll be a character that changes everything. Like they are powerful, they bring a different dynamic to what's going on, and they change the power dynamic of the story and the situation. We have one in this chapter. And this is the first time in the Old Testament that this person, who is the prophet, has been brought up by name. And that is Isaiah. Yay! The great Isaiah is here. He is alive. He is the prophet at this time that Hezekiah is the king. So this is great. He's now involved in this. So some really cool stuff we're going to see in here as well. Verse 1, and it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. So he rent his clothes, tore them, took them off. He put sackcloth on. Remember, sometimes they put ashes on their head to deal with humility. They're getting into a humble state, basically. And he goes to the house of the Lord. So he shows up to the Solomon's temple to pray and to commune with God. Verse 2, and he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So now he says, go, you guys need to go in a very humble state to talk to Isaiah. Let's get his words. Verse 3, and they said unto him, thus saith Hezekiah, this day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy. For the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. Really interesting metaphor that he uses in here, saying basically, Israel's in bad shape. Judah we got problems, lots of problems. And it's like the children want to be born. So this is like a baby who's wanting to be born. They're ready to be born. They want to be born, but they're not coming out. Basically, they lack the strength to push to get out of the womb, basically. So they want to do something, but they don't have the strength to fulfill it. This is probably a metaphor talking about surviving the ordeals dealing with Assyria. We want to fight, we want to be victorious, but we don't know if we if we have the strength to do it. So they're not fully convinced in themselves still at this point. So what the Assyrian generals had told them was pretty spot on as far as playing some mind games with Israel, basically. Verse 4, it may be the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria, his master, has sent to approach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. So they're going, saying, this is what he's told us, and God has probably heard this. What does God think of what he said? He's kind of harassing and making fun of the God of Israel. Is God going to take that? Is he going to let him get away with that, or is he going to give him some retribution here? So verse 6, and Isaiah said unto them, thus shall ye say to your master, thus saith the Lord, continuing revelation. Prophet to prophet to prophet to prophet to prophet, continuing revelation. Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. That was the prophecy that Isaiah gave to the servants of Hezekiah to take back to him, basically. And so that's what they said. So don't worry about Assyria. I will take care of them. He'll send a blast upon him. What does that mean, a blast upon him? We're not exactly sure. It could be that there's a surprise, something happens. It does say, and he shall hear a rumor. So there's going to, and so there's something that's going to convince Sennacherib to leave Lachish and head back to his homeland, which would have, at this point, I believe that would be Ashur, the city of Ashur that they had built up as the main city of Assyria. It could be. They could have switched it. I don't think they've gotten to. I think maybe they're working on Nippur actually with Sennacherib. That's a good point. They could be moving the capital to Nippur, which is more north of Israel, basically, rather than so far east, out there near Babylon. So let's see where this is. Sennacherib's gonna leave basically, and then he's gonna die in his own hand by his own sword. So that's the prophecy that's going to happen. So verse 8, so Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. So Rabshakeh returns after Hezekiah, and the people are like, all talks are off. We're holding out. All right, whatever, dude. So he goes back and he finds out that Libnah is fighting another place they're at war against, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. So now, because Libnah is fighting them. Now, there's a good chance Libnah is a vassal state of Assyria that has risen up in rebellion, and so they're fighting against him. They're trying to revolt, so now they're going to take him out. This was not an uncommon problem. This was an ongoing problem with Babylon, in fact, in the Medes. They were constantly uprising and dealing with trying to get out from underneath Assyria for a long time. Sometimes they would, pacify and be okay, because they had intermarriages with the royalty and things and built up the wealthy class, and that kind of calmed things down for a bit. Other times they said, nope, we're going to revolt, and then they would revolt, and it was always just back and forth. Babylon was kind of a thorn in Assyria's side for a long time. So when Rabshakeh returns, he finds out Sennacherib is gone. He's not in Lachish. He's moved on because he's got to fight Libnah. Verse 9, and they heard of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia. Behold, he is come out to fight against thee. He sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, let not thy God, in whom thou trustest, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? So this is a letter from Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is south of Egypt. Okay, this is more the Nubian Empire area, where they would come up and then they have to go around, either sail across the Red Sea to get out, over there, or they have to go through Egypt to get out of the land. And so he sent a message from Ethiopia over to Israel going, dude, you're really willing to stand up and fight Assyria? No one has survived Assyria, basically. Why is your God going to be delivering anything different? In fact, that's what he said in verse 12. Have the gods of the nations delivered them, which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan and Haran and Rezeph, and the children of Eden, which are in Thelasar? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, of Hena and Iva? So he's kind of saying the same thing as, look at what happened to these guys. Where are the kings of these lands that had these big established gods? They're all gone because Assyria has destroyed them, basically. Verse 14, and Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up into the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. Now, dwellest between the cherubims is a reference to the mercy seat on the top of the Ark of the Covenant that's in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And he basically says, look, you're not just a ruler of the kingdoms. You are the one that created heaven and earth. You are the God of the universe. Basically, you're not just a God of a kingdom, like a lot of these false idols down here. And he says in verse 16, Lord, bow down thine ear and hear. Open, Lord, thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which has sent him to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. So Hezekiah is admitting there is truth in what Sennacherib and his people have said, that he has destroyed the gods of these other countries. Why? Because they weren't gods. They were just statues that people worshipped. They were false gods. So this is that perspective again. Remember, Hezekiah's got the proper perspective here. And so he says in verse 19, Now therefore, O Lord our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord God, even thou only. So he's kind of saying, God, prove to everybody that you are the real God. All these are the false gods. They have fallen to Assyria. You're the real God. Prove it to them by saving our butts, basically. And I can't say that Hezekiah he's using faith, but I think also in here he is, in a way, kind of spurring God on a little bit to get, try to encourage him, find a logical way to justify saying, God, you need to save us. You need to help us, basically. Now, verse 20, Then Isaiah, the son of Amoz, sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. So the word of the Lord went to the prophet, and now the prophet's going to Hezekiah going, hey, here's what you prayed and asked God for stuff, and here's what he said. Verse 21, This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised me, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel? So the Lord's kind of sticking it to Hezekiah and Israel, going, hey, you guys are the ones that basically mocked me. You guys are the ones that had left me, basically pointing out, let's get a proper perspective here, Hezekiah, on what's going on. You guys are the ones that have made me the fool. Verse 23, By thy messengers thou hast reproached the Lord, and hast said, With the multitude of my chariots I am come to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and will cut down the tall cedar trees thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof, and I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and into the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk strange waters, and with the sole of my feet have I dried up all the rivers of besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldest be to lay waste fenced cities into ruinous heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, as the green herb, as the grass on housetops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. So talking about these guys they had little power. They were on their own. They had little power. It's like grass trying to defend themselves, or a weed trying to defend itself. What's it going to do? Verse 27, But I know thy abode, and thy going out, and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore I will put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way which thou camest. So this is some powerful metaphor that God brings in here. Now this, admittedly, if it's a prophecy given to Isaiah that he's giving out, there's going to be a lot of metaphor and story and symbolism in it. That's just how Isaiah works. He's amazing at wordsmithing. So if you think about it, he's saying here that God is going to put his hook into Israel's nose, or Judah's nose. Now, if you get a hook in your nose, what does that mean? Someone's going to lead you. Okay, and my bridle in thy lips. Like you think of like a horse bridle. What does that do? That is to control the horse's head, and wherever the head goes, the body's going to follow, basically. I will turn thee back by the way which thou camest. So he is basically saying, I am going to make you go back, turn around the same way you came in. Verse 29, and this shall be a sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such things as grow of themselves, and in the second year that which springeth of the same. And in the third year sow ye and reap, and plant vineyards and eat the fruits thereof. So this is the sign, basically. So the first year, what you're going to do is basically, I mean, they're in war. Okay, they're lacking manpower because they're dedicated to fighting and defending their areas. They're struggling. The first year, they're going to eat whatever grows on its own, which means they're not cultivating the ground. They're basically living off of whatever will grow spontaneously on its own. And the second year, you're going to do the same. So this year and next year are going to be hard years. You're going to be doing wars and fighting and challenges and other things. You're not going to be harvesting and growing yourself. But the third year, you will be growing and harvesting, which means a more abundant crop and more specific types of food that they can eat, not just whatever randomly pops up, basically. I don't know if you've ever had this happen in a garden where you have some plants, like maybe you had some tomato plants growing there, and some of them overripe on the vine and they drop to the ground and they just go to mush, and so you just ignore them and don't worry about it. But then next year, that you suddenly get tomato plants in that same area where you used to have them. Some of those spontaneous ones will grow. If you had to rely on just the spontaneous ones, you probably wouldn't have a lot of food. You know, if you can cultivate and water the ground and take care of it, you can get a better yield. If you're waiting for the second year spontaneous growth, you're not going to get anywhere near the yield you could if you actively farmed, basically. And so this year and next year, he's saying, are going to be hard years. But that third year, you are going to have the time and effort and energy to plant and sow the seed and to harvest them, which means you're not at war. So the next 2 years, you're still going to struggle. And the third year, you're not at war anymore, basically. Verse 30, and the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall yet again take root downward and bear fruit upward. So take root down, roots grow into the ground to solidify and hold on, pull nutrients. They're going to work, which is going to build the structure, allow for fruit to be born. So better people coming forward, good works, those kinds of things. Verse 31, for out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. So a part is going to leave Jerusalem. Now, some people will take this verse 31, and talk about this in context of the Book of Mormon, that a remnant shall leave Jerusalem and go somewhere else, basically, escape out. Could that be the Book of Mormon, Lehi and his people? Maybe. Maybe it's other people as well. It could equally reference other groups, other people that flee. It's not uncommon to find Israelites fleeing into Egypt or into other lands as well when times get rough and invading armies appear. Verse 32, therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into the city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. So he's saving the city for his purpose and because he promised David, King David, that he would preserve it and preserve part of a remnant, basically, that would stay. So he's fulfilling his promises, basically, there. It's interesting that he's using that same idea of he's not going to come, he's not going to be able to shoot an arrow, which means he's not coming to fight. The arrow in ancient times was also used as a symbol of power. So if he could shoot an arrow into Jerusalem, he could claim it as his land because he could shoot an arrow into it, basically. Sometimes you'd stand up on a hill, fire an arrow in each direction, and wherever those arrows landed, that was your land, basically. Huneebe has a whole chapter on that in his book, Old Testament and Related Studies, about the arrow. That's very powerful, gives some ideas in this as well. But he's not going to be able to come fight it. God is going to defend the city and take care of it, basically. So that is the prophecy and the revelation that is given to Hezekiah. So what happens with this? Let's read on. Verse 35. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. Now that is 185,000 people, basically. So can you imagine, you're this big army, you're just hanging out for years around your enemy, you're sieging them, basically, you're just starving them out and letting them waste away so you can easily take them over soon. You wake up the next morning and suddenly 185,000 soldiers are dead. That's not a coincidence. I mean, one or two died in the night. Yeah, there could have been a health problem or an issue, or they got sick or something. You know, there was an accident with their sword or something like that, or they pissed somebody off that stabbed them or whatever. You know, a few soldiers are probably not a big deal, but 185,000, there's something going on. And I think that sent a shock through everybody going, oh, what in the heck just happened? Verse 36, so Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt in Nineveh. Oh, so he's gone to Nineveh now. He's up north of Israel. So he went back to Nineveh. So they've moved from Ashur to Nineveh, basically, which is more to the western side of the nation of Assyria. Also the final holdout city of Assyria when Babylon comes through. So they left. He's like, holy crap. So here's probably my assumption of what was going on with this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too in the comments. I'm sure they woke up and went, what happened? There's probably no wound marks on these people. There's no indication of someone entering the camp. They're probably dispersed enough through the camp. There's not one little section that got hit, because you could say, oh, this section maybe got some bad water or something like that, you know, but they're all over the place. So to do the random 185,000 random soldiers just die all over the camp, basically, with no known way of knowing how did they die. That usually leads, if they can't explain it in a logical way, that usually leads them to the idea of thinking spiritual or religious or those kinds of things, realizing maybe we don't want to mess with them. Maybe we pissed their God off and their God actually is legit. We've never faced a God like this. Maybe this isn't the kind of fight we want to get into. And so they leave, basically. Now there's some more information here I want to give about this, some historical information. This is part of that Cushite connection, learning about how Israel and Egypt were together, that talks about this time of history. So today, many scholars agree that Jerusalem was not besieged. Rather, it was under a blockade. The population was cut off from their agricultural resources, and the Assyrians were free to wreak havoc on Judah, while Hezekiah was rendered powerless like a bird in a cage. To achieve a cordon around Jerusalem, the Assyrians would have needed to build a series of small forts to control the access routes and prevent entry in and out of the city. Some of the reliefs at Nineveh provide visual evidence for such blockade tactics. Isolating a city in order to wear down its inhabitants is in keeping with Sennacherib's general policy of not wantonly destroying major cities. Sennacherib's plan was to isolate Jerusalem while destroying or occupying the key Judean strongholds to its southwest. I.e., Lachish was one of those. However, this strategy was not to prevent Hezekiah from dispatching military help. Rather, it was to stop help from Taharko's Cushite forces, located even further to the southwest, possibly stationed in Egypt at Memphis, from reaching Hezekiah in Jerusalem. That was the Ethiopian king, giving some more ideas and more information up there as well. The narrative in the first part of 2 Kings 19:8 provides a strong clue regarding this scenario. The Rabshakeh and the two more senior emissaries hear that Sennacherib has left Lachish. Lachish was devastated, its stores depleted, and the area strewn with putrefying bodies. This was no place for a king and his retinue. Prudently, Sennacherib decamped to Libnah, located just a few miles northwest of Lachish. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, negotiations were suddenly broken off, and the biblical narrative imparts an undertone of panic. The explanation is provided in 2 Kings 19:9. Taharko and his army are on the march. This is a new force led by Taharko, replacing the one at Eltekah. Taharko would have had to call on reinforcements from Egypt, probably taking them away from the capital, Memphis, to a strategic place to muster, possibly Pelusium. The three Assyrian emissaries would have had no option but to leave the environs of Jerusalem and combine their forces with Sennacherib and his retinue, now stationed at Libnah. This was imperative on two counts: to form a united front against Taharku and to protect their king. The Assyrians could not risk Sennacherib succumbing to the same fate as his father. The biblical narrative relates that new, unnamed, and presumably lower status messengers were sent to Jerusalem to warn Hezekiah that even though events had taken a different turn, he must not presume that Sennacherib had forgotten Jerusalem. Yet, despite this, a prophecy in 2 Kings 19:32 through 34 contradicts the Assyrians' threat, and Jerusalem is saved. Quote, "Therefore, this is what the Lord says concerning the king of Assyria: he will not enter the city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with a shield or build a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter the city, declares the Lord." So that's what we hear here. Now, the passage declaring that Jerusalem will be saved is followed immediately in 2 Kings 19:35 with a description of the annihilation of the Assyrian army by divine intervention while in their camp. Because the location of the Assyrian camp is not specified, it is generally presumed that the Assyrian army was still in Jerusalem, but this is impossible. In 2 Kings 19:8, it is reported that the Rabshakeh and the other two, even more important Assyrian army commanders, had left Jerusalem to join Sennacherib at Libnah, and they would have been accompanied by the troops directly under their command. For example, the Turtanu commanded the provincial army, which included 150 chariots, 1,500 cavalrymen, 20,000 bowmen, and 10,000 shield-bearing spearmen. And the Rabsaris commanded the central standing army, including the royal corps and a large number of equestrian units. The Rabshakeh, although a lower-level military leader, also controlled large contingents of men, including detachments in the provincial army and a significant numbers of horses. Therefore, the biblical narrative makes it quite clear that apart from the new unnamed couriers, the Assyrian army was no longer in Jerusalem. Did the army muster at Libnah? It would have been an excellent location to allow the army to regroup and be provisioned before attempting a renewed confrontation with Taharko. Graining up the horses and feeding the troops was achieved by plundering the enemy's agricultural hinterland, a recognized military stratagem. The army would pitch camp at a given location depending on the availability of grain. The granaries would then be emptied and the grain processed and redistributed in the camp to provide food and fodder for the troops and horses. Once provisioned, where did this virtually unknown battle take place? Not at Libnah, as there is no clear archaeological evidence of any destruction due to a battle. However, a clue is provided by Herodotus, writing circa 250 years after the event. He relates a strange tale that takes place at Pelusium, an Egyptian border city 5 days' march west of Gaza. If the Assyrians had wished to cut the Egyptians off before they reached Judah, Sennacherib's army would have taken the well-known route that runs south of Bardawil. Thus, it was quite possible for the army, once regrouped and provisioned, to reach Pelusium from the area of Libnah in 7 or 8 days. Once at Pelusium, the angel of the Lord in 2 Kings 19:35 is replaced by Herodotus with mice, the Greek symbol for plague. The mice gnawed quivers and bows and the handles of shields, destroying the Assyrians' equipment and rendering them unable to fight. This strange tale is quite separate from the biblical source, and understandably, any failure of their army for any reason would not have been mentioned by the Assyrians. As noted by Lester Grabbe, this tale sheds light on an Assyrian defeat by the Egyptians that caused them to leave the battleground and head back to Assyria. The vestige of truth that lies behind this story not only explains Sennacherib's sudden and hitherto unexplained departure back to Nineveh, but also provides insight on the relations between Cush and Assyria following the conclusion of Sennacherib's third campaign. So there's basically a miracle happens. The Bible is different than what some of the historians have talked about there, but of course sometimes the historians, again, if they're not looking at it from a standpoint of this is a miracle of God, they have to find some logical reason to it, like mice rendering their weapons ineffective. Basically, they couldn't use their weapons because the mice had ruined them, and that would definitely cause some problems for their army, or a plague coming in among them and killing the people, basically. Now, verse 37, and it came to pass that as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sherezer, his sons, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. So verse 37 is that fulfillment of Isaiah's first prophecy that Sennacherib will die in his own land by his own sword. So his sons raise up and they basically kill him while he is worshiping his god. And Esarhaddon takes over his reign, basically. Not the two that killed him took his reign, but Esarhaddon did, and they were probably all in cahoots. Esarhaddon was the next in line, so he couldn't be the one to do the killing. He had to have plausible deniability to it, but the other two sons would then do the killing. But because Esarhaddon was innocent of the whole thing, he was the king, which means he could commute the other two sentences, and they wouldn't die. So the two would do an illegal deed to make the one powerful, and the one powerful would basically cover their deed and help them to escape. Not unlike a situation in modern days where maybe some people who are loyal to a president commit crimes to help the president be in power, and then they get pardoned afterwards, basically. So they cover each other to help each other out. That's hopefully something that doesn't happen, at least not often, but it has happened in the past, unfortunately. It will probably still happen because it's what they believe is a good tactic. So now there's a new ruler in Assyria, that's Esarhaddon, and Israel, Jerusalem, I should say, has been saved, basically miraculously. It's been pretty cool. Let's jump in the next chapter to continue this story on.